Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Darwin's Cipher by M.A. Rothman, narrated by Tim Campbell. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC 24/7, saving lives, protecting people, trademark. Expected new cancer cases and deaths in 2030. Report number A15928. Confidential findings, not for public release. Between 2018 and 2030, we expect the number of new cancer cases in the United States to go up about 24% in men, more than 1 million cases per year, and by about 21% in women, to more than 900,000 cases per year. The kinds of cancer we expect to increase the most are melanoma, predominantly in white men and women, prostate, kidney, liver, and bladder cancers in men, lung, breast, uterine, and thyroid cancers in women. Despite the reduction in rates of cigarette-linked cancers, such as lung cancer, we have seen steady increases in other cancer rates due to an aging population, a worsening obesity issue, and other as-of-yet undetermined factors. About 2/3 of adults and 1/3 of children are now categorized as either overweight or obese. These weight-related conditions increase risks of female breast, colorectal, esophageal, uterine, pancreas, and kidney cancers. We expect rates of these weight-related cancers, with the exception of breast and colorectal cancers, to increase another 30 to 40% by 2030. New cases of liver cancer are expected to increase by more than 50% as a result of an increase in hepatitis infections. Oral cancers in white men are expected to increase by about 30% due to a higher incidence of human papillomavirus, HPV, infections. Other potential factors for increased cancer rates include shifting racial demographics and other environmental considerations. Recommendation: it is fair to say that we are on the cusp of a cancer epidemic in our nation. More research funding is needed to focus on treatment and prevention. Otherwise, the cost of medical care for cancer patients may eventually exceed all other medical expenses combined. Paula E. Gruyere, M.D., Director of CDC, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Chapter 1. John LaForce scrambled down the steep path leading into Tikaboo Valley and took a swig from the cheap red wine he'd bought from a nearby gas station. Almost immediately, a flush crept up his neck and warmed his cheeks. He'd just been fired for the second time this month. He wasn't sure what had brought him out into the middle of nowhere in southeastern Nevada. When he was a kid, his friends used to talk about coming out here to spy on the military planes as they took off and landed. They used to whisper about secret experiments, mysterious clouds in the sky, and of course, UFOs. After all, this was supposed to be where they kept those aliens, Area 51. John didn't believe any of that crap, and he doubted any of his friends had ever had the guts to actually sneak onto the grounds or even come out this way. And as he looked around, he had to admit they weren't missing much, just acres of thick desert sagebrush. Taking another swig from his bottle, John felt the buzz from the alcohol as he scrambled down the slope. Suddenly, something broke through the thick sagebrush at the bottom of the hill. John drew his Glock from its holster and took a shooter's stance. Bobcats sometimes prowled this area. But it was just a stray dog. Dark brown coat, long tail, floppy ears. Might be a chocolate lab. John holstered his gun and whistled, "Hey, boy, what are you doing out here?" The dog wagged its tail furiously and bounded toward him. He screwed the top back on the wine bottle and held his hand out for the dog to sniff. As the animal huffed at his hand and ran its nose up and down the legs of his trousers, John noticed a bloody wound on its front right leg. "Did something take a bite out of you, old boy?" The dog whined and glanced back toward the scrub. John scratched the dog's head. "Your coat's nice and shiny. You look well fed." He shook his head and patted the dog on its back. "What are you doing out here? Someone's probably looking for you. Maybe I should get you to a shelter and see if they can find your owner. I sure as hell can't take care of you. I can barely take care of myself nowadays." A rustle of movement sounded in the sagebrush about 50 yards away. The dog whined, took a few steps up the slope, and turned to John as if to say, "Are you coming?" John drew the Glock once more and took a step toward the sound. The lab darted in front of him and gave a low growl. "Shh." John stepped around the dog. The dog whined, nipped at his pant leg, and pulled hard on his jeans, trying to drag him up the slope away from the sound. "What the hell are you doing, mutt?" John yanked his leg away and gave the dog a sideways kick, which it easily dodged. The dog backed away, whining, then yipped once and raced up the hill. At the base of the slope, two dark animals burst through the sagebrush. Two more dogs, both nearly identical in appearance to the chocolate lab, but very different in demeanor. These dogs had neither wagging tails nor lolling tongues. They eyed John menacingly, lowered their heads, and stalked closer. John aimed his gun and called out in a friendly tone, "Hey, boys, you missing a friend of yours?" As soon as he trained the Glock on the animals, they split, one going to his left, the other to his right. His heart thudding, John aimed at the dog on his right. The animal immediately darted behind a boulder. It was almost as if the animal knew the gun was dangerous. Hearing the other dog's nails scraping on the gravel, John wheeled around and fired a warning shot. The animal continued to advance, but it used a jerky zigzag pattern, making it difficult to aim. A chill raced up John's spine. His gun arm shaking, John focused on the approaching dog. For a split second, his mind flashed back to his time as an artilleryman in Afghanistan. Back then, he'd shot at enemies he could barely see. Now, for the first time in his life, he was within spitting distance of his target as he squeezed the trigger. The animal had just begun to leap when the bullet slammed into its shoulder. It fell to the ground with a whimper. At almost the same moment, John felt over 100 pounds of canine smash against his back. The second dog knocked him off his feet and clamped its vice-like jaws on the wrist of his shooting hand. John struggled with the growling animal. He started to yell when his voice was suddenly trapped in his throat. The dog he'd shot had clamped down tightly on his throat. He fell back onto the dirt, his windpipe closing under the crushing force of the animal's impossibly strong jaws. His vision wavered as he strained for breath. His heart pounding with terror, he prayed, "My God, there's so much I could have—" The world faded to black. Hans Reinhardt stood at the top of the rocky slope and breathed in the acrid smoke of burning sagebrush. A half-dozen men in fatigue spewed hellfire from their flamethrowers, and all across the burning landscape stones cracked in the fierce heat. The operation had been going well, until now. Now everything had turned to shit, a complete disaster. Despite the assurances from his bosses in the German Federal Intelligence Service, not to mention the U.S. handlers in Langley, Hans knew it was time to reset. He needed to move the operation to a more remote location, one with less chance of incidents. The base commander, an Air Force colonel, walked up and stood beside him. His name was Jonathan LaForce, Marine artilleryman, 10 years out of Afghanistan with an honorable discharge. "What the hell is he doing here? I thought this base was secure." The base commander shifted his weight nervously. "The base is secure. However, we'd underestimated the containment measures needed in the kennel. I reviewed the security tape myself. It seems one of the experiments figured out how to open the latch to its stall. Once it escaped, the others managed to copy its actions. And before anyone could stop them, the animals had dug a hole under the perimeter fence." Hans kicked a stone off the rocky escarpment and ground his teeth with frustration. "A dead Marine is the last thing we need. How big of a problem is this going to be?" The colonel's discomfort increased. "The good news is he was one of those disaffected types. No family, and it looks like he was out of a job. A wanderer who probably won't have anyone searching for him, at least not for a while. We'll deal with his remains." "And the experiments? Have they all been tracked down and decommissioned?" "We tracked 5 of the animals through the signal coming off their pit tags. We captured and disposed of them." The colonel blew out a deep breath. "Unfortunately, we have not yet been able to locate the 6th. I've sent out the drones. They're programmed to run grids across the terrain looking for the animal signal. We'll find it." Hans silently wondered how such an incompetent ass had come to be the base commander at a supposedly high-security location. "We don't have time for a lengthy search, Colonel. We cannot have one of our experiments encountering civilians." "We'll track the dog down." "It's not a fucking dog, you moron," Hans snapped. "It's a specially bred nightmare with enough strength and intelligence to escape your so-called secure kennel and take out an armed ex-Marine who got in its way." The colonel's eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. "Listen to me," Hans continued. "Both my neck and yours are on the line if any of this gets out. We can't risk our arrangement being exposed. And let's face it, your government has already proven itself incapable of keeping things out of WikiLeaks. Mr. Reinhardt, said the colonel, believe me, I know exactly what's at stake. You do not need to remind me. This is a black operation and it's staying that way. I'm overseeing the cleanup personally. The colonel pointed toward the nearby slope. We found some blood that we believe is from the missing animal. It's wounded, which will limit its ability to elude us. Between the contractors on foot and the drones in the air, we'll find it. Hans glared. You damn well better. Frank O'Reilly poured a few inches of pea gravel into the fence post hole he'd just dug. He glanced over his shoulder at Johnny, one of the ranch hands he'd recently hired. Make sure you get at least 3 inches of these rocks into the hole and tamp it down good like this, he said, tamping the rocks down with a large wooden pole. We need a solid footing for the fence posts. Them cattle rub up against just about anything, so these here posts need to be sturdy. You understand? Yes, sir, Mr. O'Reilly. And you need them posts 8 feet apart so them 16-foot planks can span 2 openings, right? That's right. Make sure them posts are square with the ground and space them evenly. Frank handed Johnny the post hole digger and smiled. The ranch hand had just turned 18, and Frank couldn't help but remember when his Kathy was that age. Johnny had that same lively spirit and energy that reminded him of Frank's baby girl when she graduated high school and took off for the world. He patted Johnny on the shoulder. You got this? Yes, sir. But if you don't mind my asking, why all of a sudden you taking on help? You fixing to retire? Frank laughed and shook his head. Johnny, I might be 53, but I've still got quite a bit of life left in me. Just get the job done, and you best be minding what I said about doing a quality job. I'm going to check all your work, so don't take no shortcuts, you hear? Yes, sir. Don't have to worry about that. Johnny hefted the post hole digger and walked to the next flagged spot. As Frank turned away, he nearly tripped on a dog that was sitting on its haunches, right behind him. Damn it, where the heck did you come from? A chocolate lab sat there with its tongue lolling. A beautiful animal, shiny coat, heavily muscled body, and obviously well-fed, not a stray. Frank held out his hand. Are you friendly? The dog stood and its tail became a blur. It sniffed at Frank's hand, then lowered its nose and sniffed at his boot and up along his jeans. Finally, it sat back on its haunches, licked its lips, and whined. Its bright brown eyes stared up at him, glanced at his trousers, and then back up at his face. It whined again. Frank tilted his head, unsure what the dog was trying to say. Then it hit him and he laughed. Ah, I know why you're so interested in me. He pulled a folded piece of homemade beef jerky from his pocket and tossed it gently to the dog. The animal snatched it midair and chewed contentedly. Well, I best be off, pup. I'll get a tongue lashing if I'm not home in time for supper. Frank walked the roughly half a mile to the modest ranch-style home he'd built almost 30 years ago. As he drew near, he heard paws padding along behind him. Figures, I know better than to feed a strange dog. He purposefully ignored the animal and started up the steps to the front porch. The aroma of roasting beef was in the air. Megan stepped out onto the porch. Oh, good, you're back. Dinner's almost ready. Go get washed up. He gave her a peck on the lips. Smells good. She looked past him with a puzzled expression. You made a friend. The lab now sat at the bottom of the porch steps, looking hopeful. Frank shook his head. I made the mistake of giving him some of the beef jerky. Megan pushed her shoulder-length auburn hair behind her ears, knelt and patted the wooden deck of the porch. Here, boy. Did you like the jerky? The dog bounded up the stairs and lay down in front of her, its belly up and its long tail sweeping back and forth over the wooden planks. Megan giggled as she rubbed the dog's belly. You're such a good boy. She looked up at Frank with that sheepish smile he knew so well. Do you think anyone owns him? No idea. He just wandered up. He's obviously been cared for, but he's not wearing a collar or anything. He hesitated. I thought after Daisy died, you swore... Oh, you poor thing, Megan exclaimed. She was examining the dog's front right leg. It looks like he got into a fight or something. The dog whimpered as she fussed over his injury. I'm sure he'll be fine, Frank said. No. Megan stood and wiped her hands on her apron. We're going to take him to the vet and get him looked at. Frank wondered how much the vet would try to gouge him for. He's not even our dog. Megan turned and gave him that look that said her mind was set. Then we can have the vet check him for one of them chips they put in dogs nowadays. Megan was 5 feet tall and built like a pixie, but once she set her mind to something, she was immovable. If 30 years of marriage had taught Frank anything, it was that. He raised his hands in defeat. What about dinner? Dinner will keep. Megan walked into the house and motioned for the dog to follow, which it did. I think we still have Daisy's old bowls. I'll see if this boy's thirsty while you go call the vet and tell him we're on our way. The examination room doors opened and a blue-smocked veterinary assistant with a long black ponytail stepped out. O'Reilly? She called. Frank waved. Right here. Her gaze shifted to the chocolate lab lying between Frank's and Megan's feet. And what's your name, gorgeous? He doesn't. Jasper, Megan announced, as if that had always been his name. Frank groaned inwardly. He hoped she wasn't getting attached. The animal belonged to someone. No way would a stray look as healthy as he did. Well, let's get Jasper weighed and see how he's doing. Jasper stood the moment Megan did, and he obediently trotted after her into the examination room. Frank, shaking his head, followed. The veterinary assistant, the name Sherry was stenciled on her scrubs, stopped beside a large metal scale. Let's see if we can coax Jasper on here. Before Megan could even nudge the dog in the right direction, Jasper walked over and stepped on the scale. "Ha, what a good boy," Sherry said. "Wow, 125.8 pounds. I'd never have guessed it." She scribbled the weight on a sheet of paper and slid it into Jasper's chart. You have one of those chip scanners? Frank asked. He ignored Megan's severe look. Jasper just wandered onto our property today, and he has no collar or tags. We don't know anyone who's missing a lab in our area, but we wanted to do the right thing and see if he'd been chipped or not. Oh, of course. Be right back. Sherry disappeared through another door while Megan began fervently petting the top of Jasper's head. Moments later, Sherry returned with what looked like a thick stick with a small loop on its end. Megan grabbed Frank's hand as the veterinary assistant approached Jasper. Sherry passed the wand back and forth over Jasper's back. Most vets inject the chip between the animal's shoulders, and I'm not seeing anything there. Megan squeezed Frank's hand tighter. Let's just make sure there isn't one anywhere else. Sherry slowly moved the wand over Jasper's hindquarters and then back toward the front again. As she neared the right front leg, the dog whined. It's okay, Jasper, Megan said soothingly. She's not going to hurt you. The veterinary assistant paused over the dirt-encrusted wound. Poor baby, you got an ouchie. Dr. Dew will make it all better. She finished dragging the wand over Jasper and shook her head. No chips that I can find. Frank sensed Megan's smile without even having to look. He sighed wistfully with the realization that they had just adopted a dog. Okay, he said. In that case, in addition to tending to that wound, let's get Jasper a full workup. Okay, Dr. Dew will be in to look at Jasper in a bit. And since it looks like Jasper is favoring his right front leg, we may need to take x-rays and sedate him to treat the wound. It'll be at least $400. She raised a questioning eyebrow. Just fix him up, Megan said quickly. We'll pay whatever is necessary. Frank kissed the top of Megan's head. There was no arguing with Mrs. O'Reilly over such things. Frank spent nearly an hour in the waiting room with Megan fidgeting the whole time, and when at last the vet appeared, without Jasper, Megan grabbed Frank's arm and held it tightly. The vet was a huge man with a bodybuilder's physique, yet his voice was soft, almost effeminate. He gave Frank and Megan a wide smile. Jasper will be coming out of sedation in about 20 minutes, but he'll be fine. He looks like he must have gotten into a fight, and the wound got infected. Luckily, the x-rays showed no breaks. However, it's fortunate that we did that x-ray because I probably wouldn't have seen this otherwise. He pulled a clear plastic baggie from his lab coat and handed it to Frank. It contained a 4-inch-long metal wire. Dr. Dew showed his arm and pointed at a 4-inch length above his wrist. That wire managed to lodge itself between the skin and muscle just above the wound. I have no idea how it could have gotten there, but it came out without any problems. So, he's okay? Megan asked. Another broad smile. Jasper's still a little loopy at the moment, but he's just fine. All stitched up. He's on antibiotics, which he'll need to take twice a day, and I'm also going to give you guys some ointment that needs to go on the wound on a daily basis. Barking sounded from the back, and the exam room doors burst open. Jasper came bounding into the waiting room, his gait a bit awkward, one foot wrapped up like a mummy. He raced straight to Megan and spun rapidly with excitement, as if he'd expected to never see her again. Sherry came in right behind him. "I'm sorry, Dr. Dew, but Jasper woke up early and began frantically pawing at the door. I didn't want him to pull any of his stitches. It looks like he really wanted to see his mommy." Megan scratched Jasper's head. Clearly, the two had already formed a bond. "Well, we can't have this big guy breaking down any doors," said Dr. Dew, laughing. "I'm quite sure he's the heaviest healthy lab I've ever encountered, and it's not even close. It's odd because he doesn't look like he'd be any heavier than 75 pounds or so, which is still heavy for a lab, but this boy's got some incredibly dense musculature. And judging by his teeth, he's still young. He might grow a bit more yet." Frank groaned. "I'm already tired just thinking about how much work it'll be just keeping him fed." Jasper walked away from them, grabbed a doggy blanket that was tucked under one of the waiting room chairs, brought it back, and laid it on Frank's lap. Megan smiled. "Aw, he heard you're tired and he brought you a blanket." Dr. Dew patted Jasper on the head. "You're one smart dog." Jasper sat up a bit straighter and woofed in agreement. Frank couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about this animal, but as he watched Megan fawning over Jasper, he knew that what he thought no longer mattered. Chapter 2. "Juan, I can't have my brother paying my bills for me. I'm getting a part-time job so I can help, and you don't have to kill yourself." With his cell phone to his ear, Juan Gutierrez took a deep breath and silently prayed for patience. Miguel had only just started his first year at Georgia Tech, and now he was thinking about taking a job. Juan looked around the research lab. He didn't make great money here, but he made enough to keep Juan in school. Barely. "Miguel, I told you I have it covered. I want you to focus on your studies, that's it. Besides, Mom's life insurance left enough to just cover your expenses." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," Juan lied. The truth was the life insurance money had run out years ago, but if Miguel knew that, the kid would probably drop out of college altogether. Juan hated lying to his little brother, but if that was what it took to keep him focused on school... "Still," Miguel said, "I can handle a part-time job, it's no big deal." Taking a deep breath, Juan spoke as calmly as he could. "Trust me, Miguel. You'll have more than enough on your plate without having to worry about catching the bus to some dead-end job. And you know as well as I do that you finishing school was Mom's biggest wish. Just let me make the monthly payments for school and you worry about your grades. You'll help out more by keeping that scholarship." Miguel had secured a partial academic scholarship, contingent on good grades, and without it, Juan wasn't sure how he'd afford Georgia Tech's tuition. Miguel sighed. "Well, okay, I'll do the best I can. And thanks." A voice in the background said, "Hey, Miguel, you up for some hoops?" "Juan, I'll talk to you later. Love you, bro." "Love you too." Just as Juan hung up, the badge reader at the lab entrance beeped, and a gray-haired security guard walked in and scanned the room. When his gaze landed on Juan, his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" The man's suspicious tone sent heat rising up Juan's neck. It was as if this rent-a-cop expected Juan to be emptying the trash cans instead of sitting in front of a lab bench. "Excuse me?" Juan snapped indignantly. "I happen to work here." The security guard frowned. "Sir, where's your employee badge?" Juan rotated in his seat, unclipped the badge from the lab coat he had draped on the back of his chair, and wordlessly held it up for the man to see. The guard nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing the rounds." He turned and walked out of the lab. Juan scowled. He knew the guard was just doing his job, but he couldn't help but wonder if the man would have been as brusque if Juan's skin hadn't been brown. Juan had long ago understood just how lucky he was. Not only had he managed to escape the projects of East LA, a rare feat, but he had completed both college and medical school, and now here he was doing cancer research for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. He looked at the picture of his mother he kept on his lab bench. She'd gotten pregnant with him when she was very young, and as a result, she'd never had the chance to build her own career. But she'd dedicated herself to being the best mother one could have hoped for. And it was she who instilled in him the idea that education was the only way out of the projects. With a dull ache crawling up his neck, Juan felt the beginning of a headache. He'd had a hard life, and it got even harder when Juan's father died. Juan was 13 and his mother was pregnant with Miguel, when one day Dad simply fainted on the living room floor. He'd been suffering from what everyone assumed was a hard-to-shake flu. His father was only 31 years old when he died. Juan still remembered the smell of the exhaust coming from the heavy traffic as Mom followed the ambulance. She had one hand on the steering wheel, the other patting his shoulder reassuringly as she said, "Mijo, it'll be all right." It wasn't all right. Dad never regained consciousness. It was late on a Sunday evening over 18 years ago when Juan first heard the word cancer. Juan heard the tremor in her voice as she repeatedly whispered a prayer to a God he wasn't sure existed. After that, Juan began lashing out in school, arguing with his teachers, getting into fights, impotently venting his rage at everyone around him. He was angry at his father for not having gone to the doctor earlier. He was a teenager who'd lost a parent. He was just angry. If it hadn't been for his mother's strong hand, his life would certainly have taken a turn in a very bad direction. It almost did. But she stood strong and she saved him from the gangs and the dangers of the streets. She was his savior, and now she was gone too. Feeling a hollowness in the pit of his stomach, Juan closed his eyes as the painful memory bubbled to the surface.
Ay, mijo, el dolor.
Mom moaned in Spanish as the pain racked her body. Tears blurring his vision, Juan watched over her. He knew she had little time left. Despite the strong odor of camphor coming from her nebulizer, her breathing was shallow and strained. She'd refused hospice care, preferring to stay at home until the very end. With a sudden inhalation, Mom grimaced and squeezed Juan's hand. He clasped her hand in both of his, and then her grip loosened. The grimace disappeared, and she closed her eyes. A tear ran down the side of her face.
I'm sorry, mijo. I can't fight anymore.
Juan softly whispered the words aloud. I can't fight anymore. His mother's last words. 8 years later, those words still haunted him. Cancer had taken both his parents from him, and those deaths had shaped the man he was today. His father's death had filled Juan with an unstoppable drive, and his mother had given him the desire to prevent others from suffering from the same hideous disease. He was driven by a single-minded obsession to find a cure for cancer. Juan glanced up at the clock and groaned. He'd promised Lisa that he'd be home hours ago. Glancing around at the lab bench scattered with his notes, printouts, and then at various other computer terminals, Juan shook his head and announced to nobody in particular, "Okay, that's enough for today." But before he could close his laptop, it dinged with an email from Agrimed's HR department. To all North American employees. As many of you know, the pharmaceutical industry has been experiencing an economic downturn. We have weathered such events in the past by increasing our investments in research and development so that we can come out stronger when the economy improves. Unfortunately, our forecasts show that the economic malaise is spreading across Europe and Asia. Therefore, it has been decided that we will take a closer look at our investments, and in some cases, separation from the company will be the result. All employees should expect to have one-on-one meetings with their immediate supervisors on whether or not they are affected. Further details on separation packages will be made available within the next week. Juan read the email a second time, glanced at the disorganized mess of notes and partial results scattered across his workspace, and groaned. He noted that they didn't say how many people would be affected. He was hopeful that he'd be spared. Cancer research was supposedly a priority at Agrimed, but he couldn't help the anxiety that tightened his chest. Because if they were going to trim back in cancer research, he might be on the chopping block. The truth was he hadn't made any breakthroughs yet, while others had come up with new protocols, had written extensively in peer-reviewed journals, or were even in the midst of administering large clinical trials. I'm screwed.
Don't you dare call and try to make up with me this time. I'm sick of your shit, Juan.
Lisa put emphasis on his name anytime she was especially upset, and tonight she was pissed. This wasn't the first time he'd lost track of time in the lab and had come home hours later than promised. And this time he even had a good excuse, what with the HR announcement and him scrambling to organize his papers. But she didn't want to hear it. She had made a surprise dinner for their 6-month anniversary. Who the hell celebrates 6-month anniversaries? Now she was shoving armfuls of her clothes into her fake Louis Vuitton suitcase. Juan couldn't help but stare at Lisa's rear as she tried to press the suitcase shut. She was wearing black yoga pants and a hot pink halter top that exposed her trim midriff. He sighed, at the same time that his libido was telling him how much fun it was to be with a 19-year-old, a woman more than a decade his junior. His brain was...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?